And we're going to continue with the 11th chapter of The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost. The professor has left Fergie on his own while he gets his flashlights. Fergie's got his bottle of holy water just kind of standing around on the grounds. But we'll go back to the beginning of the paragraph where we cut off. Snatching the searchlight from Fergie's hand, the professor stomped off into the darkness. For a few minutes, Fergie stood watching the spotlight's beam as it bounced along the ground. Then the professor passed behind some trees and the light was gone. Fergie was alone. Whistling softly, he paced back and forth for a few more minutes, and then he sat down on a stone bench that stood near the church. He turned the holy water bottle over in his hands and he laughed. Holy water! The idea of spraying this stuff in the face of some ghost was... well, it was just too funny for words. For a while, Fergie had believed in ghosts and the magical Urim and whatsits, but now his skeptical side was coming out. Fergie told himself that all the things that had happened out here could be explained. Even the rushing wind and their flashlights acting funny. Those things might be caused by electromagnetic forces or X-rays. He began to wonder why he had ever let the professor drag him along on this trip anyway. There wasn't anything to find out at the cruddy old estate, and suppose they did discover something, it wouldn't... Suddenly Fergie sat up straight. What was that? What had he heard? It was a thin wailing sound, and it seemed to be coming from the dark grove of trees that grew near the little stone temple. There it was again. With a shock, Fergie realized it was the professor's voice calling for help. Yes, there was no mistake about it. But what was the professor doing over there? Why wasn't he out at the car getting his flashlight? As Fergie sat wondering, he heard the cry again. Fergie! Help me! Help! With that, Fergie sprang to his feet. He dropped the holy water bottle onto the bench and started to run. I'm coming, Professor, he yelled. I'm coming, hang on! Across the grass he pounded, arms swinging, legs pumping up and down. It was not hard to see where he was going because the moon was rising and the sky was full of stars. In no time at all, Fergie was at the edge of the dark grove. He found the white flagstone path and began to pick his way along it. All around him the trees were rustling, but he did not hear the professor's voice anymore. At the foot of the steps that led to the bronze doors, Fergie stopped. He could not see very well in this place, but it looked as if one of the doors was ajar. Could the professor be... Help! Fergie, come here! Fergie's eyes grew wide. It was the professor's voice calling him from inside the temple. With a wild yell, Fergie dashed forward. He leaped the short flight of steps in one bound and threw his weight against the half-open door. Groaning loudly, it moved inward, and Fergie plunged into the darkness. Then he stopped. Professor? He called. Hey, Prof, where are you? Are you okay? No answer. Then suddenly all around him Fergie heard the hum and rustle of insects. They were buzzing furiously and brushing their wings over his face. Frantically, Fergie began to wave his arms, but the insects were all over his body, and then suddenly they were gone. Fergie was panting now, and sweat was pouring down his face. Professor? He said in a weak, throaty voice. Are you... Fergie's voice died. Something had stepped out of the darkness in the center of the room. It was short and stooped, and it wore a robe with a hood, and it looked like the statue outside of the temple. Excuse me. Tentacles reached out from long sleeves, and they whipped around Fergie's arms, gripping them tightly. He was being dragged forward, and the sagging hood opened wide. Fergie's head was thrust into the darkness inside the hood, and something like a large, slimy suction cup was plastered over his face. He couldn't see, he couldn't scream, and his breath was cut off. Frantically, he thrashed and kicked, but his struggles soon grew weaker, and as he started to lose consciousness, a voice in his brain kept saying, You're gonna die. You're gonna die. This is what it feels like. You're gonna die. And that's the end of chapter 11.